Good morning. We're so glad to see all of you here today. This is our final session of the Public Affairs Conference. This is a conference that we run every year. It's a signature event for the university, and we are thrilled to be able to have so many wonderful people on campus to help us understand more about inclusive excellence. My name is Stephanie Bryant. I am the Dean of the College of Business, and the College of Business is privileged to sponsor your next speaker. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about your speaker. Denny Reigle is a person who has been a personal friend of mine for about 17 years. I've known Denny through lots of, he and I are both accountants, and so we have lots of accounting organizations that we've both been involved with over the years. And he's really, truly one of the most accomplished and interesting people that I've ever had the opportunity to get to know. So you're going to really enjoy his talk today. Let me tell you a little bit about Denny's background. Denny is one of the top people in the accounting profession, certainly in the United States, I would say even in the world. Much of what he does relate to things that cross over into international standards and that sort of thing. He has for many years done special projects for the AICPA. And the AICPA, in case you don't know who they are the group that is the professional organization of CPAs. So Denny has done special projects for them for many years. He's also been very active in our accounting accreditor, the AACSB, serving at a very high level on that. He was the international president of Beta Alpha Psi. So he's the top person in the world for Beta Alpha Psi, which is a very old and established accounting honorary organization. He has been on the National Council of En-ROADS. En-ROADS is an organization that works to identify top students, some high school students, but also some college students as well. And he works with corporations, getting corporations to do internships and match those students up with internships. He has been on the National Fellowship Foundation of Woodrow Wilson and has done lots of work with historically black colleges and universities. He's done teaching at universities, speaks at universities everywhere, has done quite a bit of work with Northwestern, still does do a lot of work with Northwestern's business school, particularly their MBA program. He had a stint in politics and was deputy director of the New Jersey Commission several years ago, so he flirted with politics there. And then, of course, the way that most of us know him in this area is through his work with Arthur Andersen. And at Arthur Andersen, he spent 24 years at Arthur Andersen, one of the top partners in the United States in Arthur Andersen out of their Chicago office. At that post, he was the secretary of the foundation. He headed up the university relations, and that's where I got to know him 17 years ago as a brand new professor. That was my first time to ever meet Denny. He also was head of HR, so he did lots of issues relating to women, minorities, diversity, discrimination, all kinds of things in that area. He oversaw a $4 billion investment committee, and he was also very involved in partnership matters. So the list is so much longer. You can certainly read his bio. But I do want to tell you why we, as a College of Business, selected Denny. He was our first choice. And Denny gets lots and lots of invitations, spends lots of time doing things like this. And I certainly think he says no a lot more than he says yes. We selected Denny because of his ethical leadership and because of his cultural competence. And those are things that are two of the three pillars of our public affairs mission. So he, to me, is he's absolutely the model for ethical leadership. Several years ago, I talked at a conference, and I had an opportunity to talk about the people who inspired me most. And there are 4 people who do that, inspire me. My husband is one. There are 2 other professors. Denny Reigle was the other person on my list as the people who have most inspired me in my life. The reason why Denny has inspired me, the primary reason, is because the way that he respects all people, no matter what their station in life, no matter what they come from, no matter if you are the lowest person on the totem pole or the highest person on the totem pole. Denny is really the epitome of respect, what it means to respect people. When I came in as a little assistant professor, there are lots of newbie professors that come out of their new PhD programs. I was kind of in awe of him. He came over and spoke to me, and he doesn't even remember that because he does that so often. And I was amazed that he would take the time to come and talk to me and take an interest in my life. And he did has had a profound influence on my life. Lots of times, Denny is the person I go to for questions and for advice and for mentoring, and what a privilege it has been to know him. So he also walks on water, in case I didn't say that. And so I hope that you will enjoy his speech as much as I've enjoyed hearing him many times. Will you please join me in welcoming Denny Reigle?
Thank you.
Welcome.
Good afternoon. You know, after an introduction like that, I'm tempted to just say, I'm really good at this, you're free, it's Friday afternoon, go home. Because I'm not sure I can live up to an intro like that, but I'll give it a go. You know, I am a firm believer that the mind can absorb what the posterior can endure. And what that means for you is I'm not going to talk for a long time because I have an idea about how long our attention spans are. And if I'm talking too long, you have every right to blue and start throwing things and I'll get the message. I also will, I know it's hard to do in a forum like this, but I'll take some time to answer questions or challenges that you want to throw at me. Because I think part of a conference like this, part of a forum like this, the value of it is an exchange of ideas. And to the degree that we have the time to do that and that we can do that in this room, we'll give it a go. The title of my speech, I ought to tell you where that came from. It's called Remember They're Always Watching. How many of you know the name Robert Fulghum? A handful of you. Robert Fulghum wrote one of the most brilliant pieces of prose ever, and it's called All I Ever Needed to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. And if you haven't read it, I suggest you read it. It's less than one page long, but it's some wisdom about how to behave in the world. And Fulghum, as it turns out, has written several books. And in one of the books, he's a wonderful storyteller. I mean, he's a terrific storyteller. And in one of the books, he's talking about being a parent, something I know a little bit about, some good, not so good. And he says, you know, I never know when my son is listening. I never know if he hears what I'm saying to him. But I do know this. I know he's always watching. He's watching for symbols of hypocrisy. He's watching to see how I behave, whether it matches what I say. And so the idea of remember they're always watching is pretty important. In fact, when I was at Anderson, we used to bring in people who we'd hired from other positions, other cultures. And to get to know each other, we'd have a happy hour, and everybody would have to create a sandwich board. You probably don't even know what a sandwich board is, but it's the thing you wear, and you could write on it, you could draw pictures on it, you could do anything you want. And on my sandwich board was remember they're always watching, because I have two daughters, and believe me, they were always watching. And I'll give you an example of that. This happened to be one that they actually heard what I said, but both my daughters went to private colleges, and at one point, we got a tuition bill in the mail, and it hurt. You know, it was a big bill. And I said to my wife, my word, is this really worth it? And my younger daughter didn't miss a beat. She overheard this. I thought she was in the other room, but I guess she has really good hearing. She overheard this, and she comes running into the room where I'm talking to my wife. She says, wait a minute, Dad. She said, you always said the most important thing to spend our money on was our education, right? So I was hoisted on my own petard, as it were. But the point is, and I'm going to keep coming back to this, people are always watching. You're always watching. You're always being watched. And the examples that you set, the behaviors that you model, matter a great deal to your colleagues, to your friends, to your family, and to the world in a broader sense. Now, I don't have any answers to how this inclusive excellence would work. I'm going to try to put some ideas out there. I'll ask some questions. And frankly, I'm going to challenge you. I'm not going to try to offend you, but I'm going to challenge you a little bit. And hopefully when you walk out of here, you'll have a few things to think about on a Friday afternoon. At least that's my goal. And again, if you've got feedback for me, I'm happy to hear it. I want to read you two quotes which go directly to the importance of inclusiveness. I'm not even going to try to define inclusiveness, but we'll circle around it. But I want to read you two quotes that go directly to the importance of it. The first is from the Dalai Lama. You've all heard of the Dalai Lama. And he says, "I really admire bees like honeybees. I really admire bees' sense of common responsibility. Although sometimes individual bees fight, basically there is a strong sense of unity and cooperation. We human beings are supposed to be much more advanced, but sometimes we lag behind even insects." That goes to the importance of being part of something larger and effective. The other quote is from a woman named Vesta Kelly, who I don't know, but it says, "Snowflakes are one of nature's most fragile things, but just look at what they can do when they stick together." The point being, inclusiveness is about being, I'm going to use the word holistic. It's about being part of something bigger than yourself and making sure that to the degree you can, your friends, colleagues, neighbors, family are included in that holistic community. I'm going to speak about inclusiveness in broad terms. I'll probably touch on race and ethnicity. I certainly will touch on gender, age, religion, sexual preference, and disability. All of those are things that are worthy of talking about when you're talking about inclusion. Now, this daughter who ran in and sort of caught me unawares does this relatively often, or did this relatively often. And I got her back not too long ago. She lives in San Francisco with her husband and a one-year-old daughter. And we were talking about something political. And she said, "Dad, you know, that's kind of intolerant. You sound like an old white guy." I said, "I am an old white guy. You can tell." But I said, "I want you to recognize something, that you just made an ageist, racist, and sexist comment. Because I'm an old white guy, you've lumped me into some category which you wouldn't do that for others. So be careful about the stereotypes and even about the language you use, because the language, you know, we live with words. Semantics matter." And, you know, for once, I shut her up. She didn't have anything to say for a while, which I considered a moral and a stunning victory, to say the least. Now, in my title, I talk about the behaviors that are being modeled. You know, who's modeling those behaviors? Who's watching the behaviors? What are the behaviors? And what are the messages behind those behaviors? Well, I first want to talk. The first question I'm going to ask you is this. We're talking about inclusiveness, and a lot of times today, when we use the word inclusive, we're thinking about being sensitive to diversity. So in fact, last night I met a woman, Stephanie took me to dinner at Hemingway's. When I went back to the hotel, I met a woman who worked for the Missouri Department of Transportation, and she was here for a conference in the hotel. And she said she'd just gone through diversity training. And I can tell you diversity training is absolutely everywhere in terms of corporate America, and I suspect universities as well. So my question to you is, does celebrating diversity limit our ability to be inclusive? Are we in fact driving ourselves apart rather than bringing ourselves together? Because we've accepted diversity as a good thing. Celebrating diversity is a good thing. Does it get in the way of inclusiveness? Question that's worth pondering, I think. Now, let's talk about these behaviors. First of all, there are certain sources of our information, and I'm going to talk about those a bit. One of them is the broadcast media. And by that I mean primarily the kind of television channels you can watch. I'll tell you, I don't watch television anymore because I find it to be lowest common denominator stuff. I can't imagine that I would, and I confess, I'm being a little unfair here because I've never watched reality TV, but I've seen some of the trailers. One of my daughters, when we were in San Francisco, had on Real Housewives of Somewhere. And I thought, you know, I don't think I want to watch this. But likewise, I don't watch the news anymore either. Because I sat next to a news anchor once, and I said, why is the news always murder and mayhem? And she said, Denny, don't you understand? If it bleeds, it leads. Who decides that's the news? Is that the behavior that we want to emulate? Is that the behavior that we think broadcast media should be using? When Edward R. Murrow was a famous newscaster long before your time, it was the news business. It's now the business of the news. How many eyeballs can we get? And what gets eyeballs? Murder and mayhem. If it bleeds, it leads. So one of your sources is the broadcast media. A second source that I suspect a lot of you are very good at, certainly better than I am, is social media. How many of you do social media? Facebook, Twitter? Okay. I'm not very good at social media, but certainly social media has the power to communicate with lots of people very fast. You hear about YouTube videos going viral. In Chicago, we had a Twitter flash mob that showed up downtown about a week and a half ago seeking to do damage, harassing people, stopping traffic, attacked somebody on a subway, etc. So social media is a tremendously powerful source of information. And a lot of times it's very good, sometimes not so good. Another source is what I'm going to call narrowcasting. How many of you have satellite TV or cable TV? Or I could talk about Google for that matter. Narrowcasting is trying to pinpoint a specific audience. And Google, they know what you look at. They know what eyes are on the screen. And then they can contour what they send, what they show, who advertises, based on your viewing habits. So an awful lot of your information now doesn't come necessarily from broadcast media. It comes from social media. And it is a force that can shape your vision of the world, your ideas about the world, and you need to look at it as more than just, hey, here's where I was yesterday. There's a lot more power to the instrument, if you will, than that. Now, let's talk about who's being watched. Who's doing the modeling, if you will. And I'm going to pick three groups, which I think get a lot of our broadly defined media attention. Entertainment, sporting figures, and political figures. They're not the only ones that get covered, but they get a lot of the coverage. By the way, the hotel I stayed in, there's a party this afternoon for Miranda Lambert or Lambert, depending on your pronunciation preferences. And there's a big sign about, this party for her. There was none for me. I didn't understand that. But it goes to the point I'm trying to make. Our culture is saturated, and I use that word advisedly, saturated by coverage of sporting figures, politicians, entertainers. And I'm going to give you a little test. How many of you have heard of Lady Gaga? Almost everybody. How about Sarah Palin? Almost everybody. Wendy Kopp? One. Go to the head of the class. How about, let's see who else would be a good foil here, if you will. How about Cindy Leitner? Anybody? Okay, yes. Let me tell you, you all know Lady Gaga. You see her dress in her meat dress and her outfits. She's modeling behavior, by the way. Wendy Kopp is a young woman who I've known since she was a sophomore in college. And when I tell you what she started, you'll know who she is. How many of you have heard of Teach for America? Okay. Wendy Kopp wrote a thesis when she was a student about the need for more bright, energetic young people in front of classrooms. She started Teach for America, which is a phenomenal success from almost any lens you use to look at it. One person in this room knew Wendy Kopp. Does that strike you as troublesome that you all know Lady Gaga but not Wendy Kopp? And then I asked Sarah Palin. You all know Sarah Palin. Nobody knows Cindy Leitner, but you'll know the organization she founded. It's called MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving. Now, here's a connection I want you to make. All of those people are modeling behavior. The media that you see almost doesn't exist for the Wendy Kopps and the Cindy Leitners of the world. In my mind, that's not very inclusive at all. It's not very healthy for our culture, but it's also not very inclusive. I'll give you another one. How many of you have heard of Donald Trump? Hard not to. The Donald likes to be everywhere, doesn't he? How many of you have heard of Paul Farmer? I see a hand or two. Paul Farmer is a physician, trained at Harvard. I think he still has a position at Harvard. Paul Farmer is written about in a book called Mountains Beyond Mountains by an author named Tracy Kidder. Paul Farmer has spent much of his medical life on the island of Haiti, trying to provide health care for one of the poorest places on the planet, trying to cure tuberculosis, which is often antibiotic resistant in Haiti. You read the story, I guarantee you if you read the book Mountains Beyond Mountains, if you're not inspired, you're probably not breathing. You've never heard of Paul Farmer, but you've heard of Donald Trump. Okay, I don't need to beat that dead horse. The point is very clear. The information we get from the communication sources we have focuses on what gets the most eyeballs. As wonderful a person as Paul Farmer is, or Cindy Leitner, or Wendy Kopp, they don't get the eyeballs, so the media doesn't pay attention. And yet, when you think about the behaviors being modeled, whose behavior would you want to emulate? Whose behavior is worth modeling on your own? You are modeling. I'm going to give you a little test. How many of you have a computer or an iPhone or an iPad or a BlackBerry with you right now? Almost everybody. How many of you have used it since I started talking? Okay. I have two things to say about that. One, if I'm not good enough to hold your attention, then go for it. The second thing I want to tell you is that you're modeling behavior. The people around you see that happening. Is that what you want to say to them? Think about it. You are modeling. The other thing I want to tell you is, and Stephanie Bryan's heard this before, there was a guy who I think was kind of a quack. His name was Werner Erhard. He started something called the Esalen Institute in Big Sur, California, back in the 60s and 70s. And it was a lot of New Age stuff, and I don't know that I bought it. I guess some people did. But Werner Erhard said something really brilliant. 3 words that he tried to impress upon people, and those words are more relevant today than they were then. And those 3 words are, be here now. You can't always be somewhere else, or you're no place. There's a tragedy that happened in Illinois not too long ago. A medical helicopter crashed. They just came out this week with the cause of that crash. The pilot was texting. So here's my point. First of all, if you're driving or flying or whatever, try to pay attention. Those are pretty high-risk activities. But the more important point is if you're always somewhere else, if you're always multitasking, what's the core of you? And what are you modeling for other people? When they see that, I've said to my daughters, frankly, I wouldn't want to be starting my career now because they're on 24/7. Those iPads and those iPhones and those computers never stop. I'm going to give you a piece of unasked for counsel. Teach yourself to turn them off occasionally. Have some serious me time. Have some focus time. It's worth it. Okay, who's watching all these behaviors? Well, the first thing what I want to remind you is you are modeling. People watch you all the time. If you listen to Stephanie Bryan, the behaviors that I exhibited, I was modeling. Fortunately, in this case, they were good. I can assure you there are some that weren't so good, and I'm not going to share them with you, so you'll just have to use your imagination. But you are modeling. Your friends, your peers, your classmates, your family, they're watching you. Remember, they're always watching. Now, who's watching? It's the same answer. You're watching, but most importantly, young people watch. They get their cues. I've said for years, I listen to what people say, but I pay more attention to what they do. And so when you're behaving in whatever circumstance, people are watching. What behaviors are you modeling? And are those behaviors inclusive? Do they take account of people who might be of a different race, a different religion, a different gender, a different sexual preference, or who are disabled? And if you're not, I think you have to ask yourself, does that matter to me? I'm not suggesting that we be politically correct. I'm troubled by political correctness because I think it doesn't allow us to say what's on our mind. I think it's important to say what's on your mind, but it's equally important to listen and learn from others who might have a different perspective and an entirely different role in a situation or in our culture. So, you are not only modeling, you are watching. Now, what are the messages some of these behaviors are showing us? And this is oversimplified. The first message I see all the time is conflict. Yesterday, when I got here in the afternoon, I was going to look at my notes. I flipped on the TV in the hotel room, hoping that there'd be coverage of the Masters tournament. They don't have the Golf Channel. I couldn't figure that out. I may not come back to Springfield. But you know what was on the channel that I thought might have it if they didn't have the Golf Channel? Court TV. What do they do on Court TV? They fight. They argue. Or, you know, thank God it wasn't Jerry Springer. I mean, I could have just gone straight to Jerry Springer and watched all the mayhem. The point is, a lot of what we see is built around conflict. Why is that? Because conflict sells. You know, it gets people watching. That's a lot of what reality TV is. Donald Trump's show, The Apprentice. You're fired. Let me tell you something. I fired a lot of people, and it isn't fun. It's the worst thing I've ever done professionally. It never got easier. And to see it trivialized on television is troublesome to me. I don't think conflict is fun, not conflict like that. What else is modeled? Money. We talk about, you know, if you love sports, you turn on the sports station, you turn on ESPN. What are they talking about? The size of Joe Flacco's contract. I don't care how much money Joe Flacco makes. That's not relevant to me. What I like about Joe Flacco is I like watching him play quarterback. He's pretty good at it. But we hear all about the money all the time. And so much of media, I already made this point, is driven by money. Am I getting eyes on the tube? Are my advertisers willing to keep advertising? If you're on social media, are the advertisers showing up on Facebook? You know, are they getting the kinds of revenue that they need that they don't get from common users? So money is one of the things that drives a lot, as I'm sure you know. Appearance. We'd all like to look nice, although sometimes when I see student outfits, I wonder. But again, television, the movies, they focus so much on appearance. We don't all look like those people on the TV or on the movie screen. What happened to the rest of us? Why are we not included? When was the last time, since the movie Forrest Gump, you saw a serious role for a disabled person in a movie? I rest my case. Gary Sinise was very good in that role. But it's a rarity. It's a real rarity. I think that our media, our communications channels need to be more courageous. They also need to find a better business model to generate revenue that isn't from advertisers who only want eyeballs on their set. The last thing, and I'm not going to touch this other than to say it, sex sells. Always has, probably always will, and I'm astonished. There's one TV show that I watch. It's called Blue Bloods. It's one more police story. But I think Tom Selleck was born to play the role of the police commissioner in New York City. And the thing I love about it is that every episode, there's a family dinner. They sit around as a family. Sometimes it's nice, sometimes they're fighting with each other. But it's real. It's a slice of real life. I'd sure love to see more of that, and less, again, this Real Housewives thing that my daughter's TV was on, you know, this is kind of a grumpy old man talking. The women were falling out of their clothes, and I found that offensive. Maybe some people don't. But I can tell you that sex sells. All right, in all of this that I've talked about, here's my next question for you. Where is the inclusiveness? Are what we're being fed in broadcast media, in print media, is it inclusive? Could it be more inclusive? Could it reach a broader audience? Is that important? Now let's talk about some of the issues of the day. And every one of them is an inclusive issue of real importance. The Supreme Court of the United States is presently digesting arguments that were given to them about 2 weeks ago on at least 2 items that are directly at the heart of being inclusive. One is gay marriage. One is affirmative action. The Supreme Court is being asked to say, should gay marriage be legal? Now here's the problem with that. Gay marriage has a religious element and it has a civic element. States license marriages. Churches don't. We've given that licensing power over to the states. So, if your church is for gay marriage, you have no concerns. If your church is against gay marriage, you're at the mercy of legislators, and in this case, jurists. The point being that many people think gay marriage is an important element of inclusiveness, that if we have gay marriage, then we will be more inclusive as a society. I think one of the panels here, and Stephanie, tell me if I'm wrong, one of the panels was labeled Queer Equals Fear. You know, there may be people who are fearful of it, there may be people who disagree with it, but the point is, as a society, we have given marriage over to the licensing by the states. And those legislators need to determine, is this inclusive if we pass it? Is it divisive if we pass it? Tough questions. Affirmative action. If you know every single organization in our culture, whether it's a corporate organization that's doing hiring, or whether it's a university that's doing admissions, legally, they're not supposed to make those decisions based on race. Primarily, it's a race-based question. But at the same time, the government requires that you know exactly how many of your applicants are minority, how many you admitted, why you turned down the ones that you did. The Supreme Court is being asked to say affirmative action is inherently unfair. It discriminates against majorities. Well, here's the kicker. The state of California is now at a point where I think 48% of the population is Caucasian. People who look like me and like many of you are now a minority in the state of California. Does that mean that we should get preferential treatment when we apply to the University of California at Berkeley? Should we get preferential treatment if we apply for a job in San Francisco or Los Angeles? This gets tricky. Affirmative action was designed to be about inclusion. Has it come full circle, and is it now about maybe not inclusiveness? Tough question, which is going to get larger as our culture continues to change, demographically speaking. There's a third issue that's literally you see every day, all the time, which is an inclusion issue, and that is immigration. Immigration. In Chicago, there are marches all the time for a change in our immigration laws, for acceptance of undocumented workers. Tough question. Should we open our arms to these folks? They come here, they do a lot of good work. A lot of them are good family people. Why shouldn't we open our arms? This is a nation of immigrants. And yet there's the other question. What about the ones who come and do crimes? What about the ones who need health care that all the tax-paying citizens end up paying for? And if we give what some people call amnesty to 11 million or so folks, Does that mean they're going to turn around and bring their families? Where's the end of this? There's no easy answer. These are social questions about inclusiveness. And here's the point I want to make. I don't think we can solve inclusiveness questions with legislation. And I'll give you an example of why we can't. How many of you have heard of Roe versus Wade? Of course you have. 40 years ago, maybe longer. Has the debate about abortion quieted since then? No. It's as loud as ever. It's one of those issues that people have fundamentally differing opinions on. We've tried to legislate it. Is it successful? I don't know. If it were that successful, we wouldn't still have the loud noise from both sides. It isn't that we shouldn't legislate. It is that we should understand that legislation is not the ultimate answer. By now, you've figured out what the ultimate answer is, haven't you? The answer is you. It's the way you behave individually. People are watching. Thomas Paine, I think, said this, one concerned citizen is worth 100. It may be more than that. Look at somebody like Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa was this little, thin, frail person. Nelson Mandela spent 30 years in jail, and look at the power they had for good, and I will say for inclusion, for forgiveness, for a large tent, for the global community. You are the modelers. You are the ones people are watching, and hopefully you're watching yourself. It doesn't mean that the Supreme Court or legislators shouldn't tackle this. It does mean that what you do matters more, I think. I want to tell you a story about a woman named Madeleine Albright. How many of you recognize that name? She was the first woman to become the Secretary of State of the United States. She was an immigrant. She was from Eastern Europe. And she said something really powerful that goes to the issue of immigration and other inclusion issues. She said, when we came here, we didn't want to be proud of our Eastern European heritage. We wanted to be Americans. We wanted to be like everybody else. We wanted to be Americans first. I think that's worth thinking about. I think that's worth thinking about when you think about inclusion. You want to be somebody who models behaviors that are respectful of others and inclusive of others. So my next question is this. Where's the glue for inclusiveness? Where do we learn it? Where do we see it? Well, there are some things that are pretty obvious. Churches, community organizations like Rotary, the VFW, universities increasingly are at the center of this kind of debate. And I congratulate Missouri State for having a conference like this. It used to be that universities were the ivory tower. Well, that's not true anymore. You're out in the community, you're part of the community. You are, as a university and as individual citizens in this university, you're modeling behavior about inclusion. Now, what are the ingredients you might think about? That's easy. Involvement, dialogue, listening, compassion, demeanor, trust. Trust may be the biggest thing, and a lot of us have a little rust on our trust. We're not trusting so much. How many of you drive a car? What do you do when you hit a red light? You stop. And when the light's green, what do? You go. What if 1% of all drivers said, well, to hell with that, I'm not doing that. I'm going. Total chaos. But here's what's worse. You will stop trusting the other person in the other car to do what they need to do, and our entire system of mobility via motorized vehicles would grind to a halt. We have to trust each other to do the right thing. That's one of the reasons we're so frustrated with our politicians, because they won't listen, they won't act. They take a far out position on a different end of the spectrum, and they won't talk to each other, and if I might say, they won't include each other. That's not going to work. So I think, when you're trying to be inclusive, you want to listen. You want to make sure people trust what you say. You want to have a demeanor that's open and positive. And you want to be accountable. How many of you have seen the movie A Few Good Men? Tom Cruise, Demi Moore, Jack Nicholson, big star production. Well, this one, young Marine dies, and two Marines are on trial for their life. And they're acquitted of everything except they're convicted of conduct unbecoming a Marine. And Private Loudon Downey says, Hal, Lance Corporal Harold W. Dawson, how can that be? We did nothing wrong. They said we did nothing wrong. And Lance Corporal Harold W. Dawson replies, yes, we did. We were supposed to protect people who weren't strong enough to protect themselves. That's inclusion and accountability in a nutshell. And in that regard, I give the film community great credit. I actually saw this as a play on Broadway. It's a wonderful reminder that we're all responsible for others of all stripes. Question. How many of you have heard the song Accidental Racist by Brad Paisley and LL Cool J? A handful of you. It's a real lightning rod. There are lots of people saying that it's racist. There are other people saying, finally somebody's trying to talk about this in ways that we can relate to. I don't have an answer. I've heard the song. What I will tell you is it's worth listening to and worth thinking about, because it goes to the heart of being inclusive and being accountable. And, maybe most important, listening. All right, I'm going to wind up with a quote from Aristotle. I'm a very, very well-read person on Greek philosophy, and if you believe that, I have some real estate to sell you. Here's the quote from Aristotle. We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, therefore, is not an act, it is a habit. And you could put excellence in inclusion and insert it right there. So my message to you is, you don't have to give up your principles, you don't have to give up your beliefs, you do have to care about other people and be accountable for that. Practice inclusiveness, listen to Aristotle, and we might all live in a little better place. Thanks for your time and attention. I know it's almost 1 o'clock. I'm not going anywhere real fast, but if you've got questions or a burning thing to say, let's hear it. Yes?
I'll speak to you as one old white guy to another, if I may. I appreciated your inclusion of sexual issues in diversity. I would suggest you might think about the term sexual preference. I'm speaking as a gay man. I prefer chocolate ice cream over vanilla ice cream. I don't prefer being gay over being straight. That's a discovery I made in my life. And I think sexual orientation is a much more useful term, because sexual preference suggests I woke up one day and I decided to be gay, and that really gives people the wrong message.
Fair enough.
Just a suggestion.
Thank you. Anybody else?
We'll bring the microphones around. That one wasn't working. If you have a question, raise your hand. We'll bring it to you, because we do record the sessions.
By the way, I know the first question's hard, so we'll go to the second one. Yes, over here.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I have a question. In your opinion, do you think our nation is getting better as far as inclusiveness goes, or worse?
Let me start with a bold statement. There has never been on the face of the planet throughout the sweep of history a country that has done a better job of being inclusive than the United States of America. When you think of all the faults we have and all the issues we haven't resolved, and all the things we chide ourselves about, and rightfully so, you cannot lose perspective on the fact that we are trying harder than anybody ever did, and we've created a more open society than anybody ever did. And in my mind, we're lurching forward, sometimes one step forward, one back, but we're trying.
My name is Bryce. I'm a senior here at MSU. You briefly touched on the fact that advertising is bad, or not necessarily bad, but advertising is not a useful part of broadcast and narrowcast, and every day it's getting worse in social media because it influences the news that we get. But you didn't really talk about another successful way to fund something like that, and I know I'm not expecting you to have all the answers, but could you touch on how their business model could change so that the news we get is not based around money?
I want to correct, I don't think advertising is bad, but I think advertising dollars drives a lot of what you see and what you hear. I think there have been attempts at a different business model. When you watch satellite TV or when you watch cable TV, you actually pay a fee now for that. And so it's a user fee. It used to be the TV always came into your house totally free. Well, they've figured out that advertising can't or won't fill all their revenue needs. And let's face it, in the world of DVR and TiVo, advertising is in trouble anyhow as a business model element because people tape right over it. I think advertising has a place. I'd like to see it be more constructive. I'd like to see it be more humorous. I'd like to see it be more factual. When I see an ad that says to me, well, if you don't like it, we'll give you your money back, just try it. Try to get your money back. On the other hand, I saw a commercial the other day for Wheat Thins about a puppet who had a serious problem with Wheat Thins. And it was hysterically funny. And I thought, that adds something to life. A little bit of humor is a good thing. So the answer is, if I had a perfect answer for how to replace those revenue dollars, I wouldn't be standing here. I'd be rich as Croesus because I would have implemented that business model. But I guarantee you people are thinking about it because it's changing. Anybody else? Okay, it's 1 o'clock. Thanks again. Hope you have a great weekend.